Okay, everyone, I think we're making a start now. So my name is Ben Godfrey. I'm the Network Strategy Team Manager for Western Power Distribution. My team is responsible for undertaking these shaping subtransmission reports, completing the DSOF, and also working up much of the proposals for the DSO transition. So we're really at the forefront of understanding network needs for now and into the future, and making sure that we can adequately deliver a infrastructure that's fit for not only today's demand and generation, but also the generation and demand for the future out to 2030. So a brief agenda for today. As I said before, we're happy to take questions throughout the event through the online platform. Any questions you do have, please jot them down, and we'll try and pick them up towards the end of the session in a Q&A portion of today. So in terms of an agenda, I'm going to go through what the study objectives are, so why we carried out this particular report. I'm going to give a bit of background to the development of the network in the West Midlands. We will look at the scenarios and the modelling that we've undertaken and shown how we've developed our competences in those areas. We'll also look at the results for the West Midlands and what impact that has on the network and at what timescales. We'll also talk a little bit in detail about some of the recommendations that we've got for the areas of reinforcement, which areas of the network need to be developed. And then we'll also conclude with a little look into the future about what things we're looking to do with reinforcement and the alternatives to reinforcement. So the objective of the Shaping Subtransmission reports was really to focus our understanding of demand and generation across the network out to that 2030 scenario. So we look and we've used the same framework for as National Grid have used on their future energy scenarios. We look at we provide that scenario planning over 4 economic and environmental scenarios, and assess our network as it stands at the moment against those scenarios across a number of different timescales. And by doing that, we can understand what the exceedances in voltage, thermal limits are, understand how the network would be able to supply the future needs of our customers. And then once we find any deficiencies in the network, we can identify those and make recommendations for what types of reinforcement or other options we might need in those areas. The idea of this particular analysis is that we really want to provide advance notice for stakeholders and customers about what likely constraints we're going to have in the area, and also we can start planning low regret investment in those areas ahead of that time, so that we can closely monitor the uptake of low carbon technologies and different distributed energy resources, and ensure that we're delivering a network that is capable of delivering meeting all of our customers' needs out into the future. So the West Midlands itself, again, similar story for our other 4 licensed areas. It was designed for demand and to meet the maximum demands of a winter peak scenario. So currently our maximum demand is around about 4.6 gigawatts, and our minimum demand is 1.5 gigawatts. Every year we see maximum demand increasing and minimum demand decreasing, so the swing of our network is growing greater across the year, and that has some knock-on impacts about operability of the network. One of the unique points we've got in the West Midlands is the amount of energy storage being actively developed in the area. So we've already got some energy storage connected. We've got quite a significant pipeline of offers accepted and waiting to get onto the network, so they're in the sort of build stages at the moment. So we expect within the next 12 to 18 months a significant chunk of that energy storage to be coming live and connecting onto our network. Combine that with the total amount of energy storage offers that we've made in that area. We've almost got 2 gigawatts worth of energy storage that is looking for progression in the West Midlands area. So that's a real growth area that we're experiencing. We've had some development of wind in the area and a number of megawatts connected, but not very much looking to connect or seeking connection in the near future. It's clearly down to the local resources and how likely planning is able to be progressed in these areas. But certainly in terms of PV and solar, then we've seen a significant amount connected so far, almost 600 megawatts, and we've got a number of connected offers waiting in the pipeline, and a significant volume of inquiries that we're continually progressing. So it demonstrates that there's quite a lot of churn in. Demonstrates that there's quite a lot of churn at the moment in terms of PV offers in the area. So as a background to the West Midlands, much of it was installed for the heavy industries. That was the backbone of economic development in the West Midlands. A lot of that, either due to energy efficiency or industry moving away from that area, has reduced. And so we've seen a previous trend of energy consumption and peak demand diminishing. We're now starting to see the inflection of that due to low carbon technologies coming online and demand increasing across the network. But all of that goes to mean that there's still quite a lot of distribution capacity and availability of that capacity still there for customers wishing to connect into those areas. That's not to say that unilaterally across all of the areas of our network in the West Midlands there is plenty of capacity, because there is still some local issues, predominantly in the rural areas whereby the DER resources are a lot better, and so there's particular clusters where lots of generation is trying to connect, and that is causing voltage and thermal constraints. We also see quite a significant amount of fault level constraints in the West Midlands as well, due to the makeup of the network. There isn't very much a intermediate voltage level, so a lot of our city centres go from 132 kV down to 11, and because of the lack of an intermediate voltage level, then fault level tends to be more of an issue than it is in other topologies across our network. So we still have quite a decent amount of distribution network capacity across the region. We have run into some areas whereby the transmission system is becoming a bit of an issue for connecting additional generation, and that's predominantly because we've got a lot of generation in the south, and a lot of generation coming from the north, from Scotland, and being sandwiched between those. The flows of across the transmission network have caused some difficulties for our customers trying to connect. But overall, quite a good picture in the West Midlands, as we see from some of the results later on, and still quite a significant amount of interest in developing further technologies for generation in the area. I've put this slide in here about the clean growth strategy, and it's really trying to highlight the fact that we've had a significant amount of generation connected to date into our network across all 4 licensed areas, and we've made significant progress in re-engineering the network to be able to accommodate that. But we've still got quite a long way to go. The clean growth strategy is looking for the electricity system to provide businesses with secure and affordable clean power, and the way that we're going to be doing that is by upgrading our electricity system so that not only is it smarter and provides data or uses data to provide greater control, but it's also more flexible, so we can change the network and make sure that it fits the needs across the times of the day and times of the year as well. We'll also look to be able to take advantage of new technologies such as energy storage and wrapping that all together into a flexible and smarter electricity system. The clean growth strategy also looks at the emissions, so that the source of electricity across the whole system. And we can see on this slide here that the transition between the darker green to the lighter green is where we are now. So we've made some quite significant inroads into reducing the amount of emissions from the electricity system, but we've got quite a long further way to go. And that really sort of points towards a lot more low carbon generation and other types of emission reducing technologies to come onto the network and provide more energy rather than just the power power and capacity that they are taking at the moment. So quite a lot more work to make sure that our network is flexible in order to accommodate all that. So using the framework that National Grid has developed under their future energy scenarios, we have completed a similar study, but looking at the network from a bottom-up perspective. So building up using forecast data by region, building up these different scenarios from a local granular level, understanding what our existing mix of DG, demand, low carbon technologies, energy storages in those local areas at the moment, and building upon that with our pipeline of future projects and the economic scenarios as well underneath that FES type framework. And by using scenario planning, it gives us a range of different options of how we see the future progressing, and it allows us to undertake different analysis on our network and understand how we might be able to invest in different areas at different timescales to be able to meet an uncertain future. So the methodology that we've developed to be able to accommodate and build up these scenarios is that we've taken our existing baseline, which is our connected position, what our makeup of demand and generation is across all the different areas of our network. We've then applied our pipeline projection. So this takes into account all the churn of applications and future projects that people are requesting on our network. It also looks at the accepted schemes that we've got going ahead with some certainty, and also it takes some advice from other market intelligence about what government policy is doing, how the technology is progressing in terms of cost and reliability and so on, and builds all those projections into a sort of short to mid-term view of the world. And then finally, we layer on a stage 3, a kind of growth scenario out to 2030, which looks at more of a long-term energy assessment and where that capability needs to be developed to meet the low carbon emission targets, and how we see that progressing across those different scenarios. And we apply that and project the deployment of those generation and demand technologies across the area to understand what that is going to look like and base that future pipeline in a more local level. So if we aggregate that up and look at demand growth across our network, then we see that we're starting from 2017 here with a roughly 4.6 gigawatt peak demand. We then see that our short-term pipeline of the next year, 18 months, is fairly closely aligned. We don't see any major changes in the next 18 months. But as we start moving forward from 2019 onwards, we can see a differentiation in the scenarios. And there's quite a clear differentiation there between a no progression, slow progression, and then the more advanced consumer power, gone green scenarios. And that really points to the fact that there'll be a lot more low carbon technologies being implemented under the consumer power and gone green scenarios rather than the slow progression and no progression. Equally, when it comes to DG growth, then we're starting from that similar point in 2017. We've got slightly more closer alignment on 2018 to 2019 at the moment, because we have a lot more certainty of those DG projects that are going ahead in our pipeline. But as we start moving out towards 2020 and beyond, we can see that there's more of a separation of those different scenarios and a wider range of uncertainty across that. A similar story that the no progressions and slower progressions are more closely aligned than the consumer power and the gone green. And that really reflects the amount of low carbon technologies for generation that will be installed on the network, increasing that capacity. But what it's clear to say is that in all scenarios, we expect the capacity to be increasing quite significantly. So if we look at the most the gone green scenario out to 2030, then it's almost doubling the amount of capacity that we've got connected onto our network. So for the network modelling, what we've done is in order to build it up into a more granular picture of our network area, then we've developed these things called ESAs, electricity supply areas. These are more granular locations that allow us to put a geographic boundary across a particular area, locally build up what's happening in that area in terms of demand and DG growth, and then build up a picture out of all those little blocks and see how they affect our network across a number of different timescales. The network modelling is primarily focused on a subtransmission network. So we're looking at the GSPs, the supergrid transformers, and the 132 kV network that we own and operate, as well as the 66 kV network in the West Midlands area. By concentrating on this subtransmission reinforcement, it means that we can have a more accurate view of what the future is, because we can look at a much wider area to understand the impacts of on those subtransmission assets. And we also think that it's quite right to focus on this subtransmission network, because the timescales and the costs for doing any reinforcement tend to be quite long and large, and requires a long-term planning to be able to go and get that in progress. Whereas anything happening on a 33 kV and below level, we can be more rapid and deploy those investment onto the network quicker and for less cost as well. So traditionally, network modelling was really looking at a single steady state case of winter demand and ensuring that the network was fit for that winter peak time of peak demand. What we've seen with our network strategy modelling is that world has changed now, and we need to do some more granular modelling across a number of representative days to understand the impacts, either be that for intermittent generation, so looking at a summer peak generation day, or perhaps looking at how we can still secure the network and ensure that we've got a resilient network whilst taking things out, taking assets out for maintenance. So the summer peak demand with minimum coincident generation is also a quite key representative day for us to model. So we've taken that single edge case modelling and developed that over a number of representative days. We've also done quite a lot of work, particularly in this study, on the automation of how we study network outages and understand the resilience of our network, and making sure that that is an automated process that we can do almost independently and to a set level that will allow us to ensure that we've got resilience across all of our network. We've also started to we've tailored the generation and demand profiles based on the historical data that we've got. So it's very much a regional picture that we're overlaying, and that allows us to be more accurate and take into account any local effects that we would do, either for the types of demand or generation that we would usually see in that area and the likely mix. We've looked at developing our network automation for these modelling studies, and that allows us to more closely understand how active network management and intertripping is going to affect the network, and that enables us to use other alternatives to securing the network or reducing constraints. Rather than just putting more copper into the ground, we can provide recommendations for sequence switching schemes and other kind of contingency plans that doesn't necessarily involve large scale investment onto the network. And finally, this analysis has been taken for a baseline of 2017, but also we've stepped through the scenarios of 2020, 2025, and 2030 to understand the likely future impacts. As I said before, we've developed our modelling techniques quite significantly over the 4 licence areas that we've done this work. West Midlands has actually introduced a few new areas which are specific just for the West Midlands. So we've introduced a differing between autumn and summer peak demand days, and this is really feedback on looking at the network and understanding that the outage window that we usually take between summer is extending into autumn to be able to accommodate both generation, but also the ongoing maintenance and an increased level of maintenance that we're going to need to do on our network in order to keep our network in the best condition, and also facilitate additional connections onto the network. We've seen that just a single summer look at the world isn't quite fit for purpose, so we've extended that into autumn as well. We've also introduced the category of midday peaking substations. These are extra urban substations which are dominated by industrial demand, have a midday peak rather than the traditional evening peak that we would tend to see in domestic circumstances. So that's a new category of substation that we've done some modelling on and applied in certain areas. I said before that we've automated our analysis for security of supply, and that's a very interesting technique that allows us to apply a level of independent scrutiny into whether our network is given the best resilience, and whether there are other alternative options that we could do for providing that resilience. And then finally, the West Midlands by far and away has been the biggest study that we've done to date, because it includes quite a significant 66 kV network as well. Then we found that the West Midlands has had more modelable elements than our South West and our South Wales areas combined. So it's quite a significant study that we've done. As I say, our techniques have developed over the past 2 years, completing these reports. So we started in the Southwest looking at a very solar-dominated network. We then progressed on to the South Wales, which, because of the long feeders and the voltage constraints that we saw in that area, needed quite a lot of reactive power modelling and optimization. We've moved onto the East Midlands, which is a very demand-dominated area in the later scenarios, and so we've had to do a lot more work about understanding that makeup of demand and the impact of low-carbon technologies. And then in the West Midlands, we've advanced our contingency routines to understand how interconnected networks work, and analysing that security on an automated basis. And then finally, the next set of studies in our Southwest, which we're just starting at the moment, is really going to start looking at the calculation of curtailment and total annual energy modelling across a whole year. So really starting to shape up, if we were to use non-reinforcement techniques, how much energy would we need to store or shift in a particular area, and start setting some ideas about profiles and likely volumes for that type of capability. So the next Southwest area and all subsequent areas, we'll be doing that energy modelling, and we'll be looking to publish that in June time of this year. So moving on to results of the network, this is a new table that we've included to try and show a bit more, visually show how our network will be impacted across the various timescales. What you can see is in the 2020, then many of our GSPs do not have any requirements for reinforcement. So each of these little coloured blocks shows that there is a requirement for reinforcement under that particular scenario, be that the no progression, slow progression, consumer power, or gone green. So in the 2020, many of our GSPs don't require any immediate subtransmission reinforcement, whereas there are some other areas, such as which we'll go into in a minute, Feckenham and Nechells, that do require some level of reinforcement or changes to the way that we run the network in order to be able to facilitate that. Equally, we can see that Iron Acton and Oldbury, even out to 2025 and 2030, they do not require any significant augmentation due to the current infrastructure that we've got there and the likely trajectories of those economic modelling that we've applied. So onto the results at Bishopswood GSP. We see that these are predominantly demand-driven reinforcements, really occurring in the Upton Warren area. And it's only in the consumer power and the gone green scenarios that we see a level of demand increase that actually exceeds our network. But what we've done is we've got some recommendations for the types of options open to us to be able to solve those constraints. We've got a couple of options here, which are either to replant the Upton Warren 66 to 11 kV transformers and the associated 66 kV cable, or we could add an additional 132 to 11 double bubble transformer banked at the site to be able to relieve some of those assets. So it's important to note that these are just options for recommendation. When we actually start going to work up investment proposals in those individual areas, then we'll be looking at what proposals we've got on the table, but also take into account the latest picture of demand and generation in that area, as well as what time frame we expect this reinforcement to be able to provide a solution over. So, for instance, just uprating a single asset or a cable may buy us a small amount of time, but adding a fundamentally larger or extra bit of equipment in the area will solve their network for a longer period of time, but might be a more expensive solution in the long run. So we've really got to look at the timescales for when we expect those solutions to be valid for. In Feckenham, we saw that there are a number of circuits there that were requiring some level of reinforcement, and again, this is predominantly demand driven, and we've got a number of different options for alleviating those. So the Feckenham to Bevington circuits overload on demand in all scenarios, and that can be alleviated by either a 66 kV overhead line reconductoring or some automatic network reconfiguration. So we can secure that bit of the network by changing the way that we operate the network under certain contingencies or conditions. Similarly, the Evesham primary, that can be overloaded by demand in those scenarios, and we could alleviate that by either installing larger transformers at that site or trying to squeeze in an additional third transformer that might provide a longer time frame for solving that constraint. Within Lea Marston, there are a number of hotspots that we've identified. Some of the network is already going under an ongoing rebuild to be able to strengthen the network that we've got at the moment. And we've also identified a number of proposed changes to the circuits, so reprofiling the Lea Marston to Elmton 132, which will buy us a little bit more capacity but use the existing conductor, or if we wanted to solve that constraint for a longer period of time out into 2025 and 2030, then the reconductoring of that overhead line would be required to do that. In the Nechells area, we saw that this one was clustered that required some intervention on the 2020 timescales. Looking more closely into the 2020 scenario, then we see that the asset is actually only likely to be overloaded to an additional 1% or 4%, depending on the scenario. What we will be investigating with National Grid, who is the asset owner for those transformers, is whether we can apply short-term ratings for the duration of that, which may be a cheaper whole system solution to do that. Or we could look at running the all transformers in parallel there, which would improve the load sharing and perhaps not require as much reinforcement to be undertaken in that area. But we'd have to see how that impacted fault levels on the network in that area. Other reinforcement techniques that we have would be to have pre-fault demand transfers in and out of that group, or the reconfiguration of the circuits at Kitts Green. So there's quite a few options there that we've got to be able to solve those constraints. And Rugeley, this again is a demand-driven reinforcement, primarily at the supergrid transformers. As the demand increases, then they run out of capacity. What's interesting about the Rugeley results is that they can be solved by adjacent work at Willington GSP. There is significant transfer capability between Rugeley and Willenhall, and they're very interrelated. So one of the recommendations of this report is to more closely look at adjacent areas to make sure that there might be a solution that not only solves problems within that actual area itself, but also has knock-on impacts on sharing the transfer capacity around the network that might be more beneficial of doing that than looking at each individual GSP as an island. I think that theme runs quite strongly across the report that we've made, in that not only do we need to do that internally within WPD and from our internal license areas, but also looking to other distribution system operators to try and do complete whole system studies with them in conjunction with the transmission system operator, to be able to look for whole system solutions to facilitating demand and generation on the network. So making sure that we're aware of all the asset capability in the area, and making sure that we're doing the right thing across all regions and for the outcome of the customers. So again, back to the results overview, we can see that on the 2020, quite a few of the areas don't require any significant modification. But as we move through to 2025, and particularly the more consumer power and gone green scenarios, then pretty much all of our GSPs will require some level of reinforcement or augmentation to be able to accommodate the changes in demand and generation. So to summarise the results there, most of the reinforcements are driven by demand growth. And that's a sort of strong theme across most of the GSPs there, and particularly in the gone green and consumer power scenarios, and that's most prevalent. Some networks do remain untouched though, so the existing infrastructure that we've got there should be sufficient to accommodate all predicted demand growth and generation growth out till 2030. What's important to note is that when we're doing the reinforcements and identifying the investment in that particular area, we really need to understand what the demand and generation in that area and what the uptake trajectory is, so that we're providing the right reinforcement solution across a relevant timeline, and not just responding quickly to what we think might be the problem. And as I said before, some of the scenarios are heavily dependent on other adjacent license areas, and so we'll be working more closely with some of our sister organisations and the transmission system operator to be able to find the best whole system solutions to some of those issues. So the number of recommendations that we've identified within 2020 are identified, and these are more closely identified in the report. This information should also be quite useful, as this is likely where as there are conventional reinforcements solutions identified in those areas, then these are more than likely the areas that we will be looking to try and develop third-party provided flexibility in. So if there was anywhere that flexibility would be required on our network, then these are the locations where it would be. Similarly, when we start looking out to 2025, then there's a wider amount of reinforcement that's required in addition to the works identified within 2020 as well. So finally, as we progress through to 2030, we should have a more of a clearer understanding about what the pathway to that low carbon transition is. So it's important for us to revisit our studies, continuing to update our assumptions and make sure that our scenario modelling is fitting in with how the market's actually developing. We definitely need to start doing more whole system work to understand collaboratively and understand the impacts on both the transmission and the distribution system together across all companies and all participants in the energy sector. By doing those studies, then we should be able to have the best view about how we take reinforcement forward and whether distribution networks can provide solutions up to the transmission system operator and vice versa. We'll start to understand the viability and the feasibility of supplying energy that our customers need across the whole year, rather than just looking at the peak power flows. So at the moment, our reports very much focus on just how much the peak exceeds our requirements or our network limitations. But when we start looking at active network management and flexibility, then it's going to be increasingly more important to understand what the energy, the megawatt hour requirements are, rather than just the megawatts. And finally, we're going to be repeating these studies now as we go forward, and ensuring that we're doing this every 2 years, so that there isn't a report that's older than 18 months worth of data that we will be basing our network investment plans upon. So looking to the future, then we have got a DSO strategy out, and we updated this in December. If you're interested in flexibility and how customers can actively play a part in either developing our system or providing solutions to our system, then I would definitely point you towards that strategy, as it outlines some of the concrete actions that we've got to take forward our network and make sure that we are able to run a more active system as we integrate more renewables onto the network. Part of this is developed underneath our project Entire, which we've got a customer-facing brand, Flexible Power. We're undertaking a trial in the East Midlands at the moment, whereby we've tendered for a number of constraint managed zones, so provide some flexibility requirements out to the market across 14 different zones to understand what flexibility there is currently in the area, at what sort of price point that might play into solving some of our network constraints, and how some of our new DSR services might be able to be provided by third parties and by customers in the area. So within that Entire and on the Flexible Power project website, we explain more about our DSR services and how we're using them for pre and post fault constraint requirements on our network. And this continues the theme that it's something that we're very keen on progressing and making sure that customers are able to provide benefits back to our network and to the wider system as well. So from 2018, from this year, we will be signposting for flexibility where it's required and what our system needs requirements are across our network. And then following that up into 2019, we're going to ensure that tenders have been rolled out for flexibility across all of our license areas, so that all customers across our network have the opportunity to feed into providing those benefits back up to not only us as a distribution system operator, but also the transmission system operator as well. So one of the elements of how we invest in the network is about how we finance these works. At the moment, we currently follow our charging methodology, which basically says that where a connection triggers reinforcement, then the contribution of that cost of reinforcement should form part of the connection charge. But we also recognise that it's becoming quite difficult to be able to apply that. There's a number of different factors outside of our control that are changing the validity of being able to do that, and particularly where networks are constrained for generation and not constrained for demand, then there are some sort of there's a different treatment of costs that can be quite difficult to apply evenly, and seems some of our customers have been made aware that there is a difference in treatment, and I think there's some wider questions really that the industry needs to find answers for, about how we really want to how we can finance that strategic investment. Whether it should be directly attributed to customers or more generally socialised. A lot of the work that Ofgem is doing on the targeted charging review will solve some of these issues. So there's some real great progress that's going to be made in that area. But we're also interested in understanding how customers might seek to how customers are thinking about the alternatives to reinforcement and how they may be charged for. So if we're using flexibility in an area that may be a year-on-year service, how do we make sure that customers are aware of those charges and how they pass through? So there's some quite interesting changes afoot that might be in how we finance those works. We're more than welcome any sort of comment or questions upon that. So there are a number of other issues that we're looking to address as well, particularly as we increase the amount of flexible demand and generation on the network. Then operability becomes quite a big issue. We're aware that we have got flexibility on our network to change the way that we run the network, and it's really right for us to go and do that, because we can provide the most amount of benefits across a wider number of customers. But if in doing so, if changing the way that we run our network, if that changes either the security or the network availability for certain customers, either on A&M connections or other types of connections, then how do we provide information and visibility back to customers for that? And is it fair for an individual customer to be able to have that burden and a change into their network access for a wider benefit? So there's a few interesting issues that we've got to address there on how we provide visibility on that, and whether people are comfortable with those particular changes. And there's also a question about how we develop security in the future. We're year on year, WPD has been striving to reduce the numbers of customer minutes lost and customer interruptions that we've done, and we've got an excellent track record of delivering that. But how far do we go? For every minute that we decrease it year on year, the costs are going to go and get higher and higher. And if we're really aiming for a destination zero, is that practical, or should we be looking at other metrics to be able to be incentivized for? P2 is currently being reviewed and is in the consultation is finished now, but that will further facilitate us being able to use non-build solutions to be able to accommodate demand and generation on the network. That will be certainly something that we'll be looking to see the output of the consultation, and will allow us to further some of the DSO work that we're doing in the future. So as part of the issues that we've started to see with operability on the system, then of last year in September, we published our distribution system operability framework, which is a list of issues that sort of keep us awake at night, the problems that us as active distribution system operators are starting to see, and we're looking to sort of engage industry and open up the discussions about how we might find solutions to those things. And then finally, it's not just WPD that's leading across these initiatives. It's important to say that the industry is moving as a whole altogether, particularly through the Open Networks project under the ENA. Then we're looking at working collaboratively with the transmission system operator and other sister distribution system operators to work at some of these system operability framework issues and develop a joint whole system SOF. So it's great to see that the industry is taking on board some of these issues and moving forward together rather than us having to do individual work alone on these types of aspects. So as mentioned before, the DSOF is available on our website. If you just Google WPD DSOF, I'm sure it's the first hit there. We've put forward 9 different issues across 3 different themes that highlight some of the challenges that we're facing. We've also wrapped that into our NIA, the Network Innovation Allowance call for this year, which I think closes tomorrow. So hopefully we'll start seeing some real interesting solutions that might be outside of our conventional understanding of technology transfer or intervention by other industries. So we really welcome some solutions to some of these challenges that we're facing at the moment. So finally, in summary, and we'll pop onto some Q&A in the next few minutes as well. So if you've got some questions, please frantically type away and put them up on the chat screen on the webinar platform. But in summary, this is the 4th investment options report that we've developed as part of Western Power, and it means now that we've completed regional strategies for all 4 of our licence areas out to 2030. We will be continuing to do this on a rolling programme now as business as usual, so not looking for any innovation funding to undertake that work, but we think that it's important for us to provide sort of visibility of constraints to customers and options for us internally to develop to solve some of those issues. But what we have noticed is that there's a significant envelope of change and uncertainty, which is something that we have to keep a very, very close eye on, make sure that we're engaging with the whole of the energy system supply chain, so that everyone's aware of the work that we're all doing, making sure that neither the supply chain nor us is going to be a barrier to getting all the low carbon generation and demand connected onto the network and operating collaboratively. To that extent, it's really important that us as network operators work together, both on the transmission and distribution systems, and make sure that we develop whole system solutions to ensure that the network is running smoothly and continues to do so. We will definitely be taking forward some of those operability issues under a WSOF, a whole system operability framework, which will be jointly undertaken by underneath the ENA Open Networks programme. So the next round of strategic investment reports will be looking at the annual energy requirements, so either for time shifting or storage or other curtailment or other options, and that should start to really illustrate the regional requirements that we're going to need in our particular areas to be starting feeding that information into the market, and make sure that the supply chain is aligned with our thinking on how that will develop over time. And finally, all of these things will be picked up as part of the Open Networks project, and we're ensuring that we're going to be helping the industry move together as a whole, rather than just looking individually at how WPD can facilitate that information out to customers. Okay, so that's it from me in terms of the presentation. I've got a number of questions that are up on the screen, but as I say, we'll spend the next 10 minutes or so going through those questions and getting some answers. The slides will all be published online shortly after the webinar is finished, and we'll also make sure that there's a video download of that of this discussion available on our website. So I'll kick into some of the questions now, but feel free to type some out. Okay, I've got a couple of questions here on energy storage from Richard. So energy storage capacity in megawatt hours across our network. So at the moment we've only got a couple of installations. I'm not entirely too sure off the top of my head of the energy storage capacity, but I think that it's sub 10 megawatt hours at the moment. So they're more sort of small test systems, proof of concepts rather than large scale FFR type installations. We have another question here from Richard on operating our own battery storage. We've outlined this in our DSO strategy, so it's worth having a look at that for the actual sort of documentation. But we don't believe that we as WPD need to invest in energy storage. We think that the market will be able to deliver that at a much more better economic rate than what we would be able to do. So we think that the market will be at the forefront of delivering any of the needs for time shifting energy rather than us as a network, us as a DSO actually investing in that particular technology. However, there may be some particular circumstances whereby due to the nature of the network, either in weakly connected areas or islands, then the ability for the extra revenue streams that would make a project stack up might not be available to the market itself. So I think we would like to see some mechanism if the market wasn't able to deliver energy storage, but it was still the right thing to actually install energy storage on there. We wouldn't want to be prevented from investing in that technology, but certainly we wouldn't be looking to do that as a matter of course. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions on the overlap between our scenarios and National Grid's FES outlook provided at a national level. So there is some overlap. We've used the same framework and the methodology to be able to build that up, but really we've been taking a bottom-up approach, whereas the National Grid approach is from top-down, from a national picture. We find that as particularly relevant because there is a lot of local variation of the mix of generation and demand across our network, and we're going to need to make sure that our network assets on the distribution side are able to deal with that volatility on a regional level, and once all the regional levels are added up and summated at a national level, that level of volatility may not actually occur, or it may balance out. So I think what we will see is that there is some variation between, if each of the network operator distribution system operators was to do their own regional FES, and then you were to add up the requirements at each individual area, they wouldn't add up to the national picture, but they would broadly be in line with that. So I think we have quite a high confidence in our approach of what we've done, but obviously we need to we've aligned our approach based upon the growth rates of green uptake based on the National Grid future energy scenarios. So basically we've used the same approach, we've used the same growth rates, but applied it locally to go and get some of our own local decisions. So as we start moving towards better collaboration between the system operator and DSOs, then hopefully we should be able to more closely align our outputs of FES. It's something that we've done already with National Grid in our Southwest region under one of our regional development programs. So we've collaboratively done a whole system study to be able to understand what we need to do in the Southwest, and some of that will be coming out in our report on the Southwest in June. and the RDP itself will be reporting at the end of next month. So it'll be well worth looking at that report as and when it comes out. So we've got a couple of questions as well on the scenario work. Sorry, we've got a couple of questions on V2G and how we factor that in. I suppose to an extent, if you allow me to extend your question into energy storage as well, then the impact of V2G on energy storage is quite a tricky one to understand, because depending on the types of mechanisms and revenues involved in those technologies, the operational impact of those technologies will be different. But I think what we've done is we've been trying to model our prediction of what energy storage and V2G is likely to do is based upon a decent operational market being in place. So one which actually incentivizes the users and participants on the network to do things in line with what the network requires on a regional level rather than on a national level. And if that market was to be in place, then we should find that technologies like V2G and energy storage should be reducing the impact on the distribution network and not requiring additional network capacity. So we think that if the market is correctly laid out and the incentives on both a regional and a national level are closely aligned, then those types of impacts should be mitigated and should be reduced. We've got a question here on how our scenarios translate into the LDDS, the long-term development statement. So that's a good point. What we are starting to do is the LTDS is very much a here and now picture about what works that are identified in the immediate term, and our long-term our network strategy work is very much about looking out into the future. But they should be very closely aligned, really. So the same network studies that we do feed into both of those LTDS and the network strategy reports. So whilst they may have different underlying assumptions on how we plan our network and how we secure our network, then they should be roughly translatable and should feed into those requirements. As we start developing and providing more information out to customers on constraints and requirements for flexibility in our network, then we should see a very much more closer alignment between the LTDS, the network strategy work, and these signposting of system needs. And so that will be something that we'll be taking forward in the next year. Excellent. So we've got a couple of questions around engagement and how we pull in information from other areas. So I suppose it's one of the points we should make is that we've worked with with all the LEPs across our area to try and understand what their growth scenarios and pictures are from their local plans. We've pulled those in and sort of sanitized those and pulled that into our modelling packages so that we understand what the growth scenarios from a local council perspective are. Certainly, we welcome engagement on that part. We've tried to respond to requests from LEPs to use some of our data, and we're more than happy to make available our data directly if that helps with some of the requirements for local planning. I guess we just have to sense check that and make sure that it's not feeding back like a incorrect feedback loop, making sure that we're starting from the base data and that it's all independent of each other. But we're more than happy to share all of our data, particularly on these future energy scenarios, and make sure that they're developed in collaboration with everyone. So I think we just got one more question, if that's okay. What we'll also do is there's a few more questions that we've got, so we'll write up a full set of answers to all questions asked today, and circulate that back with the slides later on. So a final question there then is on statistical analysis. So how we measure reliability and how we automate that particular supply analysis. So we've used the approaches we've used so far for modelling have been based upon our using historical data and representative days, rather than doing some sort of Monte Carlo approach to get an even distribution across the year. Primarily, we've done that because there's a lot of the time where the network is operating well within the windows of what our network capability is, and so we don't need to have too much granular information about what it's doing. But we really do care about where our network is close to exceeding or is actually exceeding the requirements. So we've defined representative days that take into account those sort of transitional periods. As we go forward to more of energy modelling, then the Monte Carlo kind of analysis approach is going to be more applicable. So we'll be working closely with a few research academics to be able to more closely identify typical representative days and half hours across a year. That would gain us a better understanding of the 8,760 half hours across the year without having to do all those complex calculations to be able to understand that. So we're developing our approach, but at the moment I'd say it's a lot more simplified than a real robust Monte Carlo analysis. Okay, so finally, the last slide from me today is just about further collaboration. So all of our reports, presentations, webinars, other associated information is available on our website, and we'd like to try and make available everything that we can publish to everyone if that's of use. So we're more than happy to share that information where required. And similarly, if there are any further collaborative studies or discussions that you think are required off the back of this, then our team contact details are included within the slide deck and are available on our website. So I'm more than happy to have further discussions on the back of that. So I'd like to thank you all for attending our webinar. I hope it's been of use, and we will get the slide deck saved and circulated round, and a copy of the webinar included up on our website. But yeah, thank you all for your attendance, and I hope to see you at some of our events in the near future. Thank you.